The 911 call came in at 2:43 a.m. The voice on the other end trembled as drywall dust clung to his fingertips. He was a new homeowner in the quiet suburb of Elm Ridge, Oregon, calling from his basement, half-finished, cold, and oddly quiet. "I think there's someone behind the wall," he whispered. There was a long pause on the recording. The dispatcher, confused, asked for clarification. "Like, you think an animal? A raccoon?" "No," he said, barely breathing. It sounded like a girl. She said, please don't leave." By the time officers arrived, the man had taken a hammer to the drywall. What they found stunned the nation. In the narrow, suffocating crawl space behind the wall was a girl, pale, trembling, curled into herself like a paper flower crushed by time. Her fingernails were cracked and worn. Her voice was raw. But she said her name with absolute clarity. Claire Monroe. 10 years earlier, Claire had vanished without a trace. And now, she was back. But before we dive into the details of the story, kindly drop in the comment section the location you are watching from, and push the subscription button for notification on captivating and interesting stories on Chase Narrations. Now let's continue with the story. October 14, 2013. Elm Ridge, Oregon. Claire Monroe, 16 years old, zipped up her jacket and slung her backpack over one shoulder. The fall leaves crunched beneath her sneakers as she waved goodbye to her tutor, Mrs. Winslow. It was 6:37 p.m. Her mother, Deborah Monroe, remembered checking the clock and texting her daughter at exactly 7:12. "You almost home, sweetheart?" The message was marked delivered, but never read. Claire never made it home. The walk from the Winslow home to the Monroes was just 8 blocks, most of them on quiet, familiar streets. She usually walked it in less than 15 minutes. Her route took her past the corner store where she sometimes bought licorice, past the old church with the broken bell tower, and through the narrow alley behind Henderson Hardware. That alley would later become the focus of every theory, every police line, every whisper in Elm Ridge. A retired couple 2 doors down swore they saw Claire walking by their window at 7:01 p.m., her head down, hands in her jacket pockets. Nothing seemed unusual. No one followed her. No car slowed nearby. And yet, somewhere between that moment and her front doorstep, she vanished. Police combed the route for weeks. Bloodhounds traced her scent to a storm drain behind Henderson Hardware, then lost it. Her phone last pinged off a tower less than a mile from her home. Her backpack was never found. The only clue? A single red shoelace, untied and curled in the gutter near the alley entrance. Her mother insisted it belonged to Claire. Police weren't so sure. By Halloween, the search had grown cold. Flyers had faded on telephone poles. Parents no longer let their kids walk home alone. News vans came and went. And in the Monroe household, silence moved in like a tenant. Claire's room stayed untouched. Her breakfast plate remained on the table for weeks. Her mother never deleted the last voicemail Claire had left. "Hey Mom, tutoring ran late. I'll be home in 10. Love you." But 10 minutes became 10 years. And for all that time, no one knew where she was. Until someone heard her voice through a basement wall. Elm Ridge wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. Tucked between pine-covered hills and miles of farmland, it was the kind of town where the high school gym doubled as a voting center and everyone knew who coached Little League. It had a main street with one coffee shop, one diner, and one bar that closed by 10. When Claire Monroe disappeared, it was like the air itself changed. In the first 48 hours, dozens of volunteers showed up to search. They formed lines through the forest trails, combed the ditch behind the football field, and knocked on every door within a 2-mile radius. Kids taped missing posters to windows. Local churches held candlelight vigils. Deborah Monroe barely slept. Her husband, Jack, paced the house for hours each night. Their son, Andrew, only 12 at the time, stopped speaking for nearly a week. The Monroes were Elm Ridge's model family, respectable, present, good people. If this could happen to them, who was safe? Local news anchors used phrases like every parent's nightmare and a community shaken to its core. But none of those sound bites captured the quiet devastation spreading through Elmridge like frost. Sheriff Daniel Blake held daily press conferences. He looked tired even then. Each update held a painful sameness. We have no new developments at this time. We are pursuing every lead. We urge the public to report anything, no matter how small. Behind the scenes, they brought in dogs, drones, divers. They questioned the tutor, the boyfriend, the janitor at her school. They searched computers, lockers, dumpsters. Nothing. The town's only lead came from a gas station security camera that showed Claire walking by at 6:57 p.m., the right outfit, the right backpack. But the footage cut out just 20 seconds later. The camera had glitched. Or maybe someone tampered with it. No one could be sure. As the weeks turned into months, Elmridge tried to return to normal, but it was like trying to clean smoke out of curtains. Parents clutched their kids tighter. Teenagers made up horror stories. And Claire's disappearance settled into the bones of the town like an ache that couldn't be massaged out. The Monroe family became symbols. Faces on TV. A tragedy people referenced in hushed tones. You remember the Monroe girl? Still missing, right? God, how long's it been now? By the third year, no one talked about Claire in the present tense. The town's energy shifted from searching for answers to learning how to live without them. But Deborah Monroe never stopped hoping. She kept the porch light on every night. She kept Claire's room exactly as it had been, makeup on the desk, posters on the wall, a sweatshirt still draped over the chair. In interviews, she never said was. She only said is. Because she had to believe that somewhere out there, her daughter was still alive. She just didn't know she'd been 5 blocks away the entire time. In the early days of Claire's disappearance, Elmridge's police force cast a wide net, but in a town of fewer than 9,000, suspicion didn't scatter far. It clung to familiar faces. The list of potential suspects narrowed quickly to 3 men. Each had proximity. Each had opportunity. And each, in his own way, seemed off, just enough to warrant a second look. 1. The boyfriend, Noah Porter. Noah and Claire had dated for almost 6 months. He was a quiet, lanky junior with a mop of sandy hair and a soft-spoken manner. To many, he seemed harmless. Too harmless, some said. When Claire vanished, Noah became the first person interrogated. He claimed he hadn't seen her that day. They'd had an argument the night before, over a text she'd seen from another girl. He said they hadn't spoken since. But his story had holes. A friend swore she saw Noah's car parked near Henderson Hardware that night, right where Claire's trail went cold. Noah denied it. His alibi was thin, he'd been driving around to clear his head. No receipts. No GPS data. No one could place him definitively. Search dogs picked up a faint trace of Claire's scent in the back seat of Noah's car, but she'd been there before. It meant nothing. Still, the media latched on. Teen love turns tragic. Boyfriend the key to the puzzle. Noah's parents hired a lawyer. He stopped speaking to reporters. At school, he was either a monster or a martyr, depending who you asked. 2 years later, he left town. 2. The tutor, Eleanor Winslow. Mrs. Winslow was the last adult to see Claire alive. She had been Claire's English tutor for almost a year, a retired school teacher with a soft voice and a book collection that spilled into every corner of her living room. She said Claire left at 6:37 p.m. sharp. That she watched her walk down the street. That Claire was alone. But something about her demeanor raised eyebrows. Too rehearsed, investigators said. Too calm. When questioned, she admitted to burning a few old notebooks the night after Claire vanished. She said they were outdated lesson plans. The timing seemed suspicious. Neighbors recalled odd things, her curtains always drawn, the faint smell of bleach coming from her trash bins. Still, The search of her home turned up nothing. Her timeline held. There was no evidence of a struggle. Theories swirled. People whispered about a possible inappropriate attachment to Claire. A photo of Claire was found tucked inside one of Mrs. Winslow's old diaries, but she claimed it was for sentimental reasons. That Claire reminded her of her own daughter, who had died years earlier. In time, the rumors faded. But the stain never fully lifted. 3. The janitor, Frank Mallory. Frank was the night custodian at Elmridge High School, gruff, isolated, a Vietnam vet with arthritis and a wandering eye. He'd once been caught staring at Claire too long during a school play rehearsal. He had no social media, no close friends, and a basement full of unlabeled VHS tapes. When police knocked on his door, Frank didn't deny anything. He even joked. "Figures you'd come here. People always think it's the creepy janitor." But creepy doesn't mean criminal. The tapes turned out to be recordings of old westerns and war documentaries. His time card proved he was working the night Claire disappeared. Surveillance at the school backed it up. Still, his name remained on the list, for years. Every tragedy needs a villain. And Frank fit the silhouette. Just not the reality. Each of these suspects had motive, gaps, or rumor swirling around them. But none had evidence. None had left behind a trail, a fingerprint, a confession. In a cruel twist, the more the town scrutinized these men, the further it drifted from the truth. Because the person who took Claire wasn't on any list. He didn't raise eyebrows or act strange. He was quiet. Respected. Invisible. And he knew exactly how to stay that way. The first letter arrived exactly 1 year after Claire disappeared. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from a nearby city called Larchfield. Deborah Monroe found it in her mailbox on a rainy October morning. At first, she assumed it was another sympathy card or prayer note. Those still came from time to time, even a year later. But inside was a single sheet of paper. No salutation. No signature. Just 8 words, printed neatly in black ink. "She's not gone. You're just not listening." Deborah dropped the letter. Her hands trembled. She called the police immediately. Investigators bagged it as evidence, dusted it for fingerprints. Nothing. No DNA. No trace. They chalked it up to a cruel prank. Some unstable person trying to exploit a grieving mother. But Deborah wasn't so sure. Something about it felt deliberate. Personal. And then, 7 months later, a second letter came. This time, the message was longer. "You keep looking in the wrong places." She didn't run. She was taken. But she's surviving. She's waiting. You're so close. It was postmarked from across state lines, Ashford, California. Again, no prints. No trace. The words were typed, the envelope hand-addressed. Same handwriting. Same eerie tone. The authorities dismissed it again. A hoax. A sick game. But Deborah clung to it like oxygen. "What if it's really her?" she asked Detective Harris. "There's no proof it is," he replied, gently. "But there's no proof it isn't." The third letter came in the winter of 2016. It was just one line. "Tell her I remember the blue scarf." That broke Deborah. Claire had a favorite scarf, sky blue with little embroidered stars. She wore it almost daily during the fall before she vanished. Deborah had tucked it into Claire's backpack the night she disappeared, just in case it got chilly walking home. That detail had never been public. Never mentioned in interviews. Never recorded in any police report. Only Claire would have known. Deborah tried to keep the letters secret after that. She didn't trust the police to believe her. And she didn't want the press to sensationalize it. But she started responding. She wrote short, pleading notes and mailed them to the return addresses, though none had ever listed a sender. She poured her heart into them anyway, in case someone was reading. "Where is she? Is she alive? Please, tell me what to do." She never got a reply. 4 years, the letters stopped. And then, 4 years later, just 6 months before Claire was found, a fourth and final envelope appeared. No words. Just a photograph. It was Claire. Or at least, it looked like her, thinner, older, frightened. Her eyes were swollen. The image was grainy, black and white, and tightly cropped. She was staring directly at the camera. Behind her, on the wall, was something written in what looked like chalk. Basement. When Claire Monroe disappeared, Eleanor Winslow was adamant. Claire left her home at 6:37 p.m., headed toward Main Street. Alone. She insisted she watched her walk past the garden gate and down the sidewalk until she rounded the corner. It was a simple, clear timeline. One that had gone unchallenged for years. But in the spring of 2019, 6 years after the fact, something shifted. A cold case investigator named Marla Jennings was assigned to Claire's file. Jennings was thorough. Unrelenting. She combed through every detail with fresh eyes, cross-referencing the original statements with maps, timestamps, and neighborhood surveillance logs. And something didn't add up. Winslow claimed Claire left at 6:37 p.m. But a newly recovered traffic cam, a feed that had been mislabeled and forgotten, showed a figure matching Claire's description walking past the corner of 5th and Lawson at 6:32 p.m. That was 3 blocks away from the Winslow house. If that footage was accurate, then Claire must have left earlier than the tutor claimed. Meaning Winslow had lied, or at least gotten her times wrong. Jennings reached out to Mrs. Winslow for a follow-up interview. Now in her early 70s, Winslow still lived in the same house, still tutoring students in the same cluttered living room filled with dusty hardcovers. She greeted the detective with a nervous smile and tea that trembled slightly in her hand. "I told everything I knew back then," she said. "But the times don't match," Jennings replied. "Is it possible Claire left earlier than you said?" Winslow hesitated. "I suppose it's possible. I wasn't watching the clock." But Jennings had reviewed the original transcript. Winslow had been firm, specific, even. 6:37 p.m. Not a moment sooner. Why change the story now? Then came the second inconsistency. A neighbor, Thomas Greeley, came forward years after the fact. He remembered hearing a loud crash around 6:20 p.m. the night Claire disappeared, something falling or shattering in the Winslow home. He'd been working in his garage, just across the fence. Jennings asked Winslow about it. "Oh, that." "Yes, one of my antique vases fell off the bookshelf. Claire knocked into it while grabbing her backpack. It startled us both. But Claire's family swore she didn't take a backpack to tutoring that night. Just a folder and her scarf. And when Jennings asked to see the broken vase, perhaps it had been kept or repaired, Winslow claimed she'd thrown it away. No record. No photos. Nothing. Jennings didn't have enough to reopen Winslow as an official suspect. But she added new notes to the file. Winslow's story had softened over time. Grown blurrier. Too blurry, perhaps, for someone who had once been so precise. And then there was the strangest thing. When Jennings asked if Claire had seemed nervous or distracted that day, Winslow hesitated, again. "No. I mean, she was fine. Just, quiet." Quiet how? Like she was carrying something she couldn't say out loud. Jennings pressed further. "What did Claire say before she left?" Winslow's lips quivered. "She told me, if I don't make it home, tell my mom I'm sorry." That quote had never been in the original report. Jennings leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell us that before?" Winslow stared into her teacup, her hands shaking now. "Because I didn't believe she meant it. And I thought, maybe it was something I imagined." After that interview, Jennings filed a formal memo. Mrs. Winslow remains a person of interest. Inconsistencies in timeline, behavior, and memory. Suggest further review if new evidence arises. But time passed. And no evidence did. Winslow faded back into obscurity. But the doubts never left. They lingered in every retelling of the case. Every whisper on Main Street. Because sometimes, people hide things not to protect others, but to protect themselves. Before we continue, take a second to push the subscription button for notifications if you find our stories interesting. Now, let's continue. It started with a Facebook post. A woman named Teresa Valdez was traveling through Idaho when she stopped at a small-town gas station just outside Pocatello. While paying for her coffee, she snapped a photo of a teenage girl sitting alone outside on the curb. The girl looked lost. Pale. Nervous. There was something haunted in her expression. Teresa didn't know why she took the photo. She later said it was instinct, something about the girl's eyes made her stomach twist. She uploaded the image to her personal page later that evening, writing, "Saw this girl today. Something didn't feel right. Maybe I'm overthinking it." She wasn't. Within 48 hours, the photo had been shared over 80,000 times. People across the country commented with speculation, concern, and comparison photos. Then someone posted a side-by-side image, the Idaho gas station girl, and Claire Monroe. Same dark eyes. Same cheekbones. Even the same faint scar along the right eyebrow, an injury Claire got falling off her bike when she was 10. The image caught fire. That's Claire Monroe. She's alive. Someone called the police. Deborah Monroe saw the post late one night. Her heart jumped into her throat. She stared at the photo for over an hour, zooming in on every pixel. Her hands shook as she dialed Detective Jennings. "It's her," she whispered. "It has to be her." Local police in Pocatello were notified. Officers were dispatched to the gas station, but by then the girl was gone. Employees said she had been dropped off by a man driving a black van. Older. Gray beard. Heavy set. The girl had waited outside for about 10 minutes, never going in. When the man came back, she got in and they drove off. There were no security cameras. No license plate noted. No one had spoken to the girl. And just like that, the lead disappeared. Still, the FBI took notice. Claire's case was suddenly back on desks. Investigators analyzed the photo, comparing bone structure, skin tone, and eye distance. The results were inconclusive. Not confirmed. But not ruled out either. For Deborah Monroe, it was agony. She'd spent 6 years learning how to live with a hole in her life. A hole shaped like her daughter. This photo ripped it wide open again. She began attending every press conference, every community event, clutching the photo like a lifeline. She held it up on national television, begging, "If you are Claire, please, come home." But no new sightings followed. The girl was never identified. The black van was never found. And just like that, hope flickered, then dimmed. What no one knew, not Teresa Valdez, not the Pocatello police, not even Deborah Monroe, was that Claire had been in that photo. But she hadn't been dropped off by a stranger. She'd escaped. For just 15 minutes, Claire had run from the basement. Found a way out. Slipped through the old maintenance hatch when her captor forgot to bolt it. She made it as far as the gas station. But the man had found her. Tracked her. Dragged her back before she could ask for help. 15 minutes of daylight after 6 years of darkness. And then the walls closed again. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in the older part of Elm Ridge, shrouded by ivy and time. It had been empty for years. The previous owner had passed away, no known family, no estate sale, no obituary. The place lingered on the market like a bad memory, until Mark and Erica Langston, a young couple from Portland, bought it on impulse. They wanted a fixer-upper. A place with character. They got that, and more. From the moment they moved in, Erica said the house felt wrong. The air in the hallway was always cold, even in summer. Tools disappeared from the garage. Their dog refused to go down the basement stairs, just stopped cold at the top step, growling at nothing. Mark brushed it off. "Old houses creak," he said. But Erica couldn't shake it. The basement was the worst. It had a low ceiling and unfinished concrete walls. There was an odd smell, damp, but also metallic. Almost like blood. Erica found herself holding her breath whenever she went down to do laundry. And there was one section, behind an old water heater, where the wall looked newer. A slightly different shade of gray, cleaner than the rest. Almost like it had been replaced. Late one night, about a month after they moved in, Mark was in the basement trying to replace a fuse when he heard it. A noise behind the wall. It wasn't mice. It wasn't pipes. It was a voice. Faint. Raspy. Just one word. Help. He froze. Thought he was imagining it. Then he heard it again. Please, don't leave. Mark stumbled upstairs and called 911. By the time emergency responders arrived, Erica was crying on the porch. Mark had already started hitting the wall with a hammer, tearing through the drywall in frantic chunks. What they found changed the course of the investigation, and the town, forever. Behind the wall was a hidden chamber, no more than 6 feet wide. No door. No window. No way out from the inside. And inside that chamber was Claire Monroe. Thin. Dirty. Her hair long and matted. She shielded her eyes from the light, blinking like she hadn't seen it in years. A paramedic knelt beside her, trying to get a pulse. Claire flinched at first, then grabbed his hand. Don't let him take me again, she whispered. The news broke within hours. Breaking, Claire Monroe found alive after 10 years missing. Held captive in Elmridge basement. The girl in the wall. Neighbors gathered outside the house. Reporters swarmed the scene. And at the hospital, Deborah Monroe collapsed into her daughter's arms, nearly a decade after she thought she'd lost her forever. Claire was barely able to speak. But her first words to her mother were unforgettable. You left the porch light on. Deborah sobbed. She had, every night for 10 years. And now, finally, her daughter had come home. The hidden room was smaller than a jail cell. Concrete on all sides. A low ceiling. No insulation. No windows. Just a mattress on the floor, stained and torn, and a plastic bucket in the corner for a toilet. There were scratch marks on the walls, hundreds of them. Tiny etchings counting days, weeks, maybe years. One wall had a name carved into it, over and over again. Claire. Claire Monroe had lived inside this box for nearly 10 years. Forensic investigators were stunned. The room had been deliberately built. Whoever constructed it had experience in hiding things. The drywall was newer, but textured to match the older concrete. The seams were covered with false studs, painted to blend in. A layer of soundproof insulation had been wedged behind the wall, cut precisely to muffle noise, but not fully block it. There was a single air vent, tunneled discreetly from the outside, allowing just enough airflow to keep someone alive. Police found a sliding panel mechanism, hidden beneath a tool bench, that opened the space from the outside. Inside, there was no handle. No switch. No escape. This had been a prison. Built not just to contain, but to vanish. Claire was kept under heavy observation at Elmridge General Hospital. She was dehydrated. Malnourished. Her muscles had atrophied. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, and her eyes struggled with light. But within 48 hours, she began to speak, in fragments at first. She remembered everything. He said, no one was looking anymore. He brought food, once a day. Cans. Crackers. Sometimes he made me listen to news reports, about me. He said I belonged to the silence now. She described the man who held her. She didn't know his name, only that he wore gloves. Always gloves. And he smelled like books and mildew. He never touched her. Never beat her. But he talked to her like a possession, something broken that belonged to him. And sometimes, when he was angry, he'd play loud music through the wall. 4 hours. Days. Until her ears rang and her thoughts dissolved. In the corner of the room, officers found a rusted lockbox. Inside were personal items. Claire's old-school ID. A lock of her hair tied with a ribbon. A spiral notebook with torn-out pages. A small figurine she'd won at a carnival the summer before she vanished. These weren't trophies. They were mementos. Whoever had kept her had watched her for a long time. Known her routines. Loved her, in some distorted, monstrous way. Claire had written in the margins of the mattress with a nail. Still me. Still here. Still Claire. Elmridge was stunned. The house where Claire had been found was just 6 blocks from her family home. People had walked past it every day. Some had attended backyard barbecues there. No one suspected anything. The Langstons, who'd bought the house, were relocated. Reporters camped outside the property. Online sleuths tried to determine who the previous owner had been. The deed history showed a shell company. No clear name. But Claire remembered something more important than a name. She remembered a voice. 2 weeks after Claire's rescue, Detective Marla Jennings sat in a conference room surrounded by boxes of old evidence, most of it forgotten, collecting dust since the early days of the case. One of those boxes held Claire's junior yearbook. It had been reviewed before. Flipped through during the initial investigation. Not much stood out. But Jennings, haunted by Claire's voice describing the man with gloves, decided to look again, with fresh eyes. This time, she saw it. Page 137. A group photo taken in Mr. Holbrook's history class. Claire sat front row, her smile faint. But in the top right corner, almost outside the frame, was a blurred figure leaning in through the door's small window. A face partially obscured. Watching. Zooming in revealed a pale man with wire-rimmed glasses. Receding gray hair. And gloves. Leather gloves, indoors, in spring. The image had been ignored before. Written off as an unimportant photobomb. But Claire remembered him. Jennings brought the photo to Claire in the hospital. Claire studied it for a long moment. Her fingers trembled. "That's him," she said. "You're sure?" "I'll never forget his face. That's the man who took me." The room fell silent. He hadn't been a teacher. Not a janitor. Not even a parent. But someone had allowed him into the building. Someone had trusted him enough to walk the halls of Elmridge High. Jennings began cross-referencing old visitor logs, volunteer rosters, and maintenance work orders. It didn't take long. His name was Warren Fielding. He'd been hired as a temporary HVAC contractor in the spring of 2013. Worked 2 weeks replacing ductwork in the school's East Wing, right around the time Claire started tutoring sessions. No criminal record. No complaints. He'd never returned to Elmridge after the job ended. Paid in cash by a subcontractor that had since gone out of business. The address listed on his employment record? A P.O. box in Larchfield, the same city that had postmarked the first anonymous letter to Deborah Monroe. A chill ran through Jennings. This wasn't just coincidence. A warrant was issued immediately. But Warren Fielding was gone. The house he once rented was vacant. The P.O. box had been closed 5 years earlier. Neighbors remembered him as quiet. Polite. Said he was always working on some project in the basement. One woman recalled something odd. Fielding had once told her he was building a reading room no one could find. The FBI placed him on a national wanted list. His name went public. His face was splashed across every news channel. Warren Fielding, the man behind the wall. Contractor turned captor? Claire Monroe's alleged abductor still at large. But Fielding had vanished, just like Claire once had. The yearbook photo, once meaningless, became a symbol. It was reprinted in newspapers, examined on Reddit threads, and broadcast in documentaries. Because sometimes, the monster isn't a stranger hiding in the dark. Sometimes, he's in the background. Already inside the frame. Warren Fielding had vanished. No digital footprint. No credit cards. No phone activity. It was as if he'd been swallowed by the earth the day Claire Monroe escaped. And yet, the FBI knew he was still out there. He was too meticulous to panic. Too calculated to be reckless. And far too invested to let Claire go without watching what came next. 3 weeks after Claire's rescue, the Elmridge Police Department received an anonymous email. No subject. No greeting. Just a single line. You opened the wall. But you never opened her mind. Attached was a photo of Claire, taken from behind a window. It was recent. Post-rescue. She was seated in her hospital bed, looking out the window, unaware she was being watched. The message was clear. He was still watching. The email was routed through multiple servers across 4 countries. A digital maze. But the location where the photo had been taken gave agents a clue. Warren had been near the hospital, within walking distance, possibly even inside. That was his mistake. Detective Jennings sat down with Claire the next day. This time, she didn't bring questions. She brought a proposal. If we want to catch him, Jennings said gently, we need you to help us set the trap. Claire didn't flinch. She nodded slowly and said, he'll come back. If he thinks I'm alone again. It was risky. Ethically complicated. Legally fragile. But Claire insisted. She wanted it. Needed it. This wasn't just about catching him, it was about taking back control. They crafted a story and fed it to the press. Claire Monroe was recovering well but had been moved to a quiet retreat in an undisclosed location for privacy. They released a photo, staged but authentic looking, of Claire in what appeared to be a residential care home, reading on a porch swing. The location? A safe house rigged with motion sensors, surveillance cameras, and plainclothes FBI agents hidden in nearby vehicles. Claire volunteered to sit on that porch swing every day, at the same time, for 5 days straight. Waiting. On the 3rd day, a black Nissan Sentra circled the block 3 times. On the 4th day, the same car parked half a block down. No one got out. The windows were tinted. By the 5th day, agents were ready. At 2:14 p.m., a man approached the edge of the property. Baseball cap. Aviators. Limp in the left leg. He stood just behind the fence, watching Claire. Then he reached into his coat. 2 agents moved. He bolted. But Claire had already told them he would. He always has 2 exits, she'd warned. He never runs unless he's mapped the back way. And this time, they had the back way covered. He made it 3 blocks before a plainclothes agent tackled him to the ground in the alley behind a laundromat. Inside his backpack, a camera with a telephoto lens, a printed map of the safe house street, a bottle of chloroform, zip ties, an old photo of Claire, junior prom night. He didn't speak for hours. When he finally did, it was only to whisper. She wasn't supposed to leave. If you enjoyed this episode of Chase Narrations, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue to share impactful and meaningful content.